Hola, pasad que estamos a punto de dar comienzo al episodio 9 de LIBRISIMO, esta vez con la autora McCarthy. Os recuerdo que el programa ya está disponible en modo podcast en iVoox y que siempre podéis abonaros allí o al canal de YouTube, dejar un me gusta o un comentario. Nuestra invitada de hoy teje relatos con melodías macabras desde su vieja granja de Gales. Entre sus obras destacan la antología Mist and Megaliths y la novela corta Immortelle, así como relatos breves en diversas antologías y revistas. En 2023 publicó una novela juvenil, The Wolf and the Favor, una novela gótica, A Moonlit Path of Madness, y una novela corta, Mosaic, que es la que viene a presentarnos de la mano de Dilatando Mentes y con traducción de José Ángel de Dios García. Y ahora sí, doy paso a nuestra charla que espero que os guste. Everybody, and we are here with McCarthy. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Christina. Thank you for having me today. I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you for coming. I understand that you are visiting us from far, far away. Where are you actually?
I live in Wales, part of the UK, just in case some people are not so certain, because I know some people think of UK as, just England. And I live on the west coast of Wales, close to the sea. And, it's much more sort of country over here, rural. Yeah.
Yeah, we will talk about rural UK later because your book Mosaic is coming up in Spanish with Dilatando Mentes. And this is the reason why we're here. Yeah. We normally start with the first question I always ask everybody is not related to the beginning of the book, it's to the beginning of the work itself, which is the title. Why did you decide to title this book Mosaic?
Okay, well, Mosaic, I'll just show very quickly. Mosaic is a story about a stained glass artist named Robin. She's a newly qualified artist. She has many hang-ups and issues going on. And she gets commissioned rather mysteriously to renovate a very ancient stained glass window in a church that's set in a woodland setting, like very, very rural and away from any kind of roads and so on. And even though she's young and she enjoys modern work and so on, the window actually captures something in her. She's drawn to it and compelled to piece it back together. But basically the main sort of underlying thread in Mosaic itself is that she wants to find, and so does the chairman, wants to find as many pieces of the original stained glass window as possible. So it's kind of like a treasure hunt. She finds them in all sort of places around the church, and then other people, such as the gardener, finds them and passes them on to her and so on. And there's a rather mysterious allocation of pieces towards the end as well. So I just thought really I loved stained glass and I love ancient churches. So I just thought of a mosaic being pieced together bit by bit, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, but jigsaw wouldn't make a good title. So I just thought of it as, I love writing about art as well, any sort of artifacts, especially ancient artifacts. So that's where it came from, really, just the piecing together of the glass.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember that the moment and where were you when first you come up with this idea?
I do. We're quite fortunate where I live. There are an awful lot of very ancient churches. Some of them date back to, pagan times, but then the buildings have been here since the 11th or 13th century. But as religion has kind of died out, which it has, especially in this country, a lot of the churches have fallen into decay and they've become derelict. So there's a charity that I follow called Friends of Friendless Churches. They're a fantastic charity. And they put a lot of money into renovating these churches and bringing them back to the original state. Well, there's one, they're not then used as places of worship. They're used as historical kind of, just to stop the buildings going into decay. There's one not far from where I live, probably a maximum of 3 miles. And my husband and I go there regularly, and it's a lovely walk along a river. It's a few miles from where you park, and you walk along the river past all the fields and so on. Eventually, I can remember the first time we spotted it, it's incredible. You go around a corner and suddenly there's this old ancient church, and the amount of history there is incredible. So it's one of our favourite walks, and there's a bench there and we often sit. It's not close to any houses or anything. It's completely peaceful, and you just sit with the birds. And I sometimes read us a little story. My husband's he's partially sighted at the moment. He's got lots of eye issues and he's waiting for surgery again. So we sit and we read, and we might take a little picnic. And I know it's very strange, but we literally can spend hours in a church. And I just wish I could show this particular church to everybody. It's called, it's in a little place called Manodivey, and it's called St. David's. And we spend time there, and it's got some stained glass, and I just think about the renovation. So that's really where the inspiration came from, just being in that setting.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I had the opportunity to travel to Edinburgh, and I I was doing some studies there, and I actually, the library in Napier University, which is the place I went, one of them was in a church, or used to be a church.
Yeah.
You could do photocopies next to the place that you baptize people. I thought it was like, wow, I've never seen a church, and there's so many church. I mean, from different, from different denominations, from different religious denominations, that some of them have been remodeled or updated to serve other purposes because they don't want them to go into decay. So I thought that was something I've never experienced in my country, in Spain. You normally just go for mass or for, religious celebrations. So that was kind of like refreshing. And there is something about these places, places of worship, and that are ancient. You already talk about some of them coming from pagan times.
Yeah.
And the connection with the pagan mythology or beliefs. What is it? Why is it so? Why does it attract so much stories related to horror, or with horror ingredients, this type of settings? I'm thinking about Gothic literature, which is always in those like mansions or castles or even churches. Why do you think it's the weight of the history?
I think it's kind of because it's not so far. Well, pagan times are far back, obviously, but if you think more Gothic, it's kind of within our grasp of understanding. And yet it's far back enough to be mysterious, because none of us have actually lived during those times. So we've only experienced it through, stories and films. And yet it's accessible enough to tap into those feelings. And I just think these kind of buildings, like you say, the houses, the mansions, they're very kind of romantic, but not particularly in a love romantic sense, just in their atmosphere. And when you enter these buildings, they tell their own story. And I love messing about with anthropomorphism, and like the church I'm talking about at the moment. When you go in, the pews are there, and you can see the wealth that was in the area from the land, the landowners and the gentry, because as the simple pews are at the back, and then as you go forward, they kind of got their own boxes, so they've got more space, and they've even got their own little fireplaces in their pews. And then above them then will be plaques, like there's one in this particular church of a local man who was a landowner, and he was sent to war, and he shot at a tiger and got mauled to death by the tiger in India. And you think back to those times, you're talking a few hundred years ago, and so he's buried in that church and the plaque is on the wall, but that story comes from being mauled by a tiger in India, this very wealthy guy. And I don't know, you just see these little things, and there's a certain smell, and there's a certain, they're always cold, but but nice cold. I just think they tell their own stories. These buildings. I think so much has happened inside them in the past that they part of that kind of those events. I like to think of it. I know it's silly, really, but I like to think of some of those sort of supernatural events clinging to the objects and the fabric of the building, so that when you go there, you might read a few names on gravestones or wherever, and you kind of start to feel that person's story.
It's like an energy, I would say, if I can
Yeah.
describe it. I think there's certain places, maybe because of the experiences people lived there or around there, that you can tap into that kind of energy without being, I don't want to sound like
No,
new
no,
wave or something, but
no.
just saying it's like I experienced myself in certain places where, as you said, the weight of time, you can kind of feel it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you feel, I wouldn't say it's supernatural, but it's true that there are
No.
feelings that you can't really describe, and you're like, oh my God, it's like I felt like somebody was like looking at me, and I know there's nobody, and
Yeah.
you can kind of like see that in this story where this young girl, who I thought this putting together the stained glass is kind of also a metaphor. I don't want to say this is a metaphor, but I know some people really dislike talking about their stories as metaphors for anything. But I really thought there was a parallelism with her own story, because we are piecing
Absolutely.
together her
Yeah.
personal story throughout this journey. So I
Yeah.
wanted you to talk about Robin. Why,
Okay.
first of all, why she has this name related to a bird. I think
Yeah.
there's several names related to birds. I would like to
Yeah.
know the reason why. And who is her?
Okay. She's early 20s. She's a very sort of vulnerable character because she's come from a family where her parents are classic narcissistic setup. She has a sister named Wren, so there's the bird connection. That's kind of because I adore birds, and I don't know, whenever I'm outside, I just sit and listen to the birds is enough for me, kind of thing. So I just wanted that her family had chosen two bird names. And without giving spoilers, as you know, there's a crow that particularly features strongly throughout the story of Mosaic. It has a very important role to play. So birds are important all the way throughout the story. And there's the dream scene where Wren morphs into the cat as well, and there's all that kind of thing. So there's lots of parallels with the birds. But she comes from a broken family, and as you say, this is where it links with the piecing together. It's kind of as she pieces the mosaic together, she grows stronger and she begins to heal, because at the beginning of the story, she's just sort of recently estranged from her whole family. She's newly qualified. She lives in a tiny little bed sit. Her parents have written her off just because, well, basic classic narcissistic family where she is the scapegoat and has always been the scapegoat within the family, whereas her sister Wren is the golden child. And if anyone sort of looks up the sort of history of narcissism and typical narcissistic families, that is often the case. So all her life, she's been kind of persecuted and treated as second rate by a very egotistical father, particularly, whereas the mother is the enabler. So they've cut her off with no financial help whatsoever, no support. But she's very broken. She's estranged even from her sister. It's all completely ended. And she doesn't want to make up with them either. She needs to heal. And in order to heal, she needs to stay distant from them. She needs to know that that's been the cut-off point so that she can go forward. She has one friend that was a childhood friend called Jules. She helps her along the way a little bit. But Robin is a very kind of introverted character who likes to sort of make her own decisions and do her own thing, which is part of the problem with Mosaic, because she feels she's being influenced by this church and by Jonathan Hargreaves, the chairman, and she feels pulled towards that. But then he also kind of represents a father figure as well, because he's older and so on. But it's just basically, I love broken things, and that includes people. And my own personal, I've always suffered with anxiety since childhood. And I find writing a fantastic way to really get those feelings out through my characters. So that's basically her journey. As you say, it's definitely a healing journey as she completes the mosaic.
As if her craftsmanship, it's also a healing tool.
Yeah.
Because she feels more connected to those pieces of crystal some of it's ancient, or we think it's ancient, and then to people. And we see her struggling a little bit to create meaningful relationships with others. She, as you said, she keeps to herself. And but she's not a hideous person. She's quite nice. It's just that it's like a mixture between being very private person, very an introvert, and a little shy, and she kind of doubts herself. So it's a very believable character. And then I was going to ask you about Mr. Jonathan Hargreaves. Hargreaves. I don't know if I pronounce it.
Yes, that's right.
So he's this person who's much older and commissions her for this, and it looks like he has unlimited resources, and he absolutely wants to update this or renovate or repair this stained glass, and it goes to all kinds of things to try to make it happen. And I wanted to know if you based it on someone, what he represents, without giving spoilers.
It is difficult to talk about him without giving spoilers, because he's kind of two-faced in a way, because she's always uncertain whether he is a good guy, a genuinely just a guy who's getting on a bit. He wears a crumpled linen suit and always wears these dark purple mirrored glasses like from the 1970s, so she can't see what's behind the eyes. And he never steps out of line at all the way through the story. And yet there's something about him that she can't quite trust. He's partly based on a person I know, but I daren't say who that is. That's about it really, without giving too much away.
And that's why everybody who's listening or watching, you have to read the story, and then you will find out. And I recommended it. I also wanted to talk about Bellsbury, which is the place where this church, I don't know where you find the name for the church, if it actually exists or not, but I looked up Bellsbury, and it seems that there is a place called Bellsbury somewhere. A very, very cute place with old houses and a kind of like idyllic. And you, before you were already talking a little bit about, the setting, because you live also in a rural area and you go to this church that you mentioned, St. David. I think you mentioned that the name, no, right? The church that you go.
Yes, St. David's.
St.
Yes,
David. So you already gave us some data about the setting, but I wanted to know why you decided the setting to be this one. Why it was so important that it was in a rural area. It was because of the isolation, because of the connection with the pagan mythology, because you needed to be somewhere where she felt was able to feel different things without intervention of many people, because she has while she's working on the stained glass, we have to say there's other people working on the
Yeah.
on the church to renovate the
Yeah.
church. So there's some interactions, but limited. Most of the time she's alone with
Yeah.
the window glass.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know about the setting, and it was probably you took inspiration from the one you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, well, that is actually one of many. The setting is a bit of a mixture, and in my head, I see certain places. St. Sannans is actually a church in Wales. It's a church in the Welsh Valleys, which is where I grew up. I haven't always lived in West Wales. I used to live in South Wales, which is far more industrial. It was a coal mining area. So my husband and I married in St. Sannans Church. So I took the name from St. Sannans, and that dates back from the 11th century. It's a Gothic church with the bell tower, the crypt underneath, the Gothic arches and pillars. So that kind of architecture was in my mind. So I called it St. Sannans, and but St. Sannans is semi-rural, but not as nowhere near as rural as it is actually in Mosaic. And then the setting was kind of where I talk about with in the rural setting, but I've also come across here there are so many of these ancient churches, many of which are derelict. You literally wouldn't know about them unless it was passed on by word of mouth. They're in such hidden places. So it's all that kind of thing. And then Bilberry is actually a little village, like you say, the kind of quintessential British, little tiny little rural community. But the people who live in Bilberry in Mosaic are all very much linked to the outcome. Again, I have to be careful for spoilers. So they're all part of Jonathan Hargreaves' team, but silently. So they are very typical. Some of them are middle-aged, some of them are kind, some of them are unkind, but all sort of secretive. Now, Bilberry is an actual village in the Cotswolds in England, the name, but I only took the name from there and then the kind of stone that they used for the buildings. But in my mind, when I was writing the story, it is set, Bilberry is actually a little place about half an hour from where I live on the sea coast called Newport Parog, which is just one little line of shops. Very, again, sort of a very insular, quiet little community, that kind of feeling you get where it's all very glorious on the surface, but you kind of get the feeling that things go on beneath the surface, so even the walking from the car park is up a steep hill. The tiny little museum is in a cottage. So lots of those. So I had Newport Parog in Pembrokeshire in my mind when I described the town. So it's a bit of a mixture then. It's a conglomeration of a few things.
It's also a puzzle, like it's setting made out of multiple parts, which is perfect for this story. It really fits within the theme. I wanted to know about the challenges that you faced when you were writing Mosaic. So what would you say was your biggest challenge while writing the story? And what was the easiest thing for you?
Okay. It started life as a short story that I had published in an anthology, but the outcome was very, very different in the short story. But I kind of couldn't let go of that story and those characters and the window. So I decided to develop it into a novella, and it's changed hugely, hardly recognizable. But I'm very good at beginnings when I write. I know where I want to start and just a very vague outline of where I want to end. So I knew the window needed to be pieced together and something would happen. I always struggle in middles. I always get this sort of lull in the middle where you're kind of thinking, right, now what comes next? So, what is the character telling me to do next? So that's always a bit of a struggle for me. And then my husband, luckily, he's very artistic, very creative, far more creative than I am, visually especially. So when I get stuck, we'll go and sit somewhere like the church, or we've got a multitude of places that are inspirational, and I'll tell him where I am with the plot. And he's amazing. He says, well, how about this? And we talk about what might come next. And with the ending of the story, because it's a genre blend mosaic, maybe we'll mention that more later. But we decided to come up with a cosmic horror ending, which is quite sort of out there. And that didn't come to my mind at the beginning. I wasn't sure how to bring this window to life then. So those were the main little struggles, really. But it wasn't too bad, Mosaic. It was pretty straightforward to write.
And do you have in mind a particular scene or fragment that you would say is a key? You don't have to describe it, but you can say, oh, this particular part, I think it's really key in the ensemble of the story.
I think there are a few scenes that really come to mind when I think of the story, because, it's been published almost 2 years ago in English. But when I think of the story, there are certain scenes that come to mind. So one of them would be where the gardener, the caretaker gardener, he's an elderly man. He's quite an important character in the story. He reminds Robin of her grandpa, her deceased grandparent, and her deceased grandfather was the only person who really understood her, because he knew what was going on with her father behind the scenes, but he couldn't, openly challenge her father, because he would have cut him off and he wouldn't have had access to his grandchildren. But so Gron walks like her grandfather, sorry. He says certain things and he likes certain hymns that her grandfather liked. So now and again she'll catch him wandering down the path of the church singing. She refers to her grandfather in the story as Pappy, and he sings Pappy's favourite hymn. So there's one scene where Gron hands her a few slivers of glass, and they're actually one of the slivers belongs to the tongue of the creature in the window. It's very difficult without giving too much away, but the creature in the window, the deity in the window, has an enormously long tongue that spews from his mouth and trails all the way down towards his knees. And he hands her a piece of stippled glass. It's red with the little stipples like the little taste buds on the tongue. And she gets such a visceral, dominant reaction to that piece of glass. And she imagines, well, does she imagine that Gron is a different type of character? And then when she sort of recovers by putting the sliver down on the window, Gron is just the perfectly natural Pappy type figure again. So there's that scene. The end scene is obviously very important, where the window comes to life, but I daren't give too much away about that. There's one little scene which might not mean a lot to other people unless I explain this, but there's one scene, as I said earlier, there's a crow which plays an absolutely vital role all the way through the story. And Robin and the crow develop a kind of relationship, because like you said, she's on her own a lot, during the book, and she will go and take a cup of tea outside and sit in the sun and look at the gravestones and so on. And the crow sometimes brings her little gifts, shiny gifts. But there was I wrote one of the scenes where she's busy piecing the window together, is coming towards the climax where, this window is starting to take shape and place. And the crow comes pecking at the window, sort of drawing her attention outside. And she tries to shoo the crow away, but it pecks and pecks. And she has to go outside and literally shoo the crow away. Well, it was really strange because when I wrote that scene, my office wasn't here upstairs at the time. It was downstairs, and my house is a 200-year-old farm cottage, by the way. It was quite atmospheric, especially downstairs. And I was sat in, and it was evening time, just coming towards dusk. I was sat and I just wrote that scene where the crow is demanding her attention. And I was literally sat with the window at the side of me, and there was a tapping at the window, and it made me totally jump. And I looked, and this is honest truth, there was a crow tapping, pecking on my window.
Really?
And I had just written that scene. It was crazy. It really scared me. So those are the kind of memories that come back to me, really. Apart from Robin's personality, she's so hurt and so vulnerable,
Yeah. I also like the scene where she goes into the crypt.
Yeah,
And she goes underground a bit, and I thought it was very symbolic because we
yeah,
don't know. You never really describe any. You don't really need to know the details of this very toxic relationship she had with her family, but you kind of wonder, why is she so afraid of the underground? And you come up with all kinds of terrible ideas that could have happened to her, things that could have happened to her that make her have this trauma. And I thought it was very intelligent that you don't tell too much and
everything. Yeah,
let the reader come up
yeah,
with his or her own ideas of what the type of thing, terrible things that could have happened to her.
yeah,
So, and that connects with my next question, which is, we just have few more to go. But you mentioned cosmic horror, and we also talk about this atmosphere that you create, and it's not so much the things you say, but the things you don't say,
don't
but you
say.
just kind of let it slip into the
Yeah,
story, and people start, asking questions and creating their own ideas.
yeah.
And so I wanted to know, what is your personal connection with cosmic horror, and why did you decide that this story, especially the end, had to be, had to end the way it ends and with this ingredient?
Yeah. For many years, I've loved writers like Lovecraft's work and played Call of Cthulhu and so on. I know he's kind of, his views are not au fait with modern times, but I see him as a product of his time. And then Arthur Machen in particular was a Welsh weird and cosmic horror writer. I kind of I really connect with his work, partly because he's Welsh. And I think the Welsh are renowned for their kind of singing and kind of musicality and poetic grasp of language. And I think that's why I connect with that kind of visually stimulating work, without too much being said. So all those writers, Algernon Blackwood and so on, all those old cosmic horror writers, really, those stories are kind of with me, but I try not to ever repeat anything. I try to come up with something new. And I borrowed the character of Nyarlathotep. I'm never certain how to pronounce that, but I think it's Nyarlathotep. I hear it pronounced a few different ways for this particularly story, because he's the man of, well, I call him a man, right? God or deity, the man of many faces. So, he's been many things throughout his long ancient lifespan. He's been a real man. He's also been other kind of characters. So I borrowed that character for the ending, the cosmic ending. I just felt that because of all the links to nature as well, the sea that comes into it, the stars, the sky, the moon, all that kind of love of nature, I just felt that would blend really well, with the cosmic.
And do you remember, because you said it earlier, that this story started as a short story and then
Yeah.
it grew. But do you remember approximately, for those that are out there listening or watching us and they're authors themselves, do you remember in the process of writing the story, how many versions of the story you went through?
So I used the short story just as a starting point, just like I say, basically same character, same main character, same stained glass window to renovate, same setting, and then I did something totally different with it. But I'm a writer who writes one version and I edit as I go along. That doesn't suit everybody, but for me, that's the way I've always worked. So if I was going to write a bit of something today, I would always begin by revising and editing what I had done the previous session. That's just the way I work. So I only ever actually write one draft,
Okay.
but it's been edited and tweaked and revised time and time and time again. And then when I get to the end, then I do several sessions of editing and revision. Especially always 100% of the time, I will read that story aloud. Luckily, my husband's a willing audience, because I find that you find more errors or more necessary revisions. It might be to do with rhythm, it might be to do with pace, it might be, there's all sorts of things that will come up when you read a story aloud as compared to on the page. I don't know whether that partly comes from, I was a primary school teacher for 27 years, so I was always, and I was a specialist in literacy with the children, so I taught English mainly. And so I was always reading texts aloud, and I always encouraged the children to do the same. So they would have, reading partners and read aloud to each other and help each other in that way. But that is a vital part of it for me. So one draft, but edited many, many times.
You're not the only one who has mentioned reading out loud. Some others who came to LIBRISIMO have also experienced that this is a good way to catch repetitions or things that don't work really well when you actually say the words. Do you remember how this story came to Dilatando Mentes?
I kind of got to know, am I pronouncing his name right? Jose?
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
I got to know him through social media, and through other friends of mine, writer friends who had work published through him. And he's a lovely, lovely person. I strongly recommend Dilatando to anybody. They're wonderful people to work with. They really are kind, generous, genuine. Just they've been an absolute joy to work with. It was just a matter of because the story was published by Dark Matter Inc., he got to know me and my books, and he contacted me one day and asked if I would be interested in it being translated into Spanish, and I jumped at the opportunity. He's also going to do the same with my other novella by the same publisher, The House at the End of Laceline Street, so that one will be out in Spanish as well. So it was just a matter of building up relationships, and getting to know him, really.
I hope we can reconnect when this novel will be translated into Spanish and coming up, and you will come back and visit us again so we can talk more about your work.
Yeah.
And just want to say hi to Jose Angel from here. I already know him, so just good work, Dilatando Mentes. Just kind of like wrapping up our conversation, I would like to know, what are you working on right now? If you can say it, if you can talk about it.
Yeah. I have a few things coming out. I have the Spanish version of Mosaic coming out. I have a genre blend, because I write in a wide range of genres with the same kind of voice, but the genre isn't necessarily the same. I have a dark fantasy / artistic literary fiction novella coming out soon called Death of a Clown. That's very much a metaphor for death, by the way. It's an artist's journey, basically, a writer's journey. That's being published in May this year. I have a short story being published at the end of the year through in an anthology with Brigids Gate, another one of my publishers. That's called From Earthen Grave to Feathered Wing, and it's a story about femicide. What I'm working on at the moment, I'm writing a cosmic horror short story just for the love of it, because my husband gave me a great idea the other day and I couldn't resist it, based on the Hounds of Tindalos. But that's an aside. I'm going to reveal something now to you then, Christina, that no one else in the world besides my husband knows. And it's that I'm actually working on a sequel to Mosaic.
Wow, that's great. That's news.
I always said I would never write a series, and it's not intended to be a series. And I never thought I could write a sequel, because I tend to let things go and feel like they're done and dusted. But with the ending of Mosaic, there is so much that can happen next. And to tell that story then from, Robin will still be there, but to tell it from another character's point of view, with the importance of what happens at the end, which I won't give away. But lots of people have said to me, oh, as you said earlier, I don't give everything away. And sometimes I'm criticized in reviews for that. But you didn't tell me, you didn't dot all the I's and cross all the T's. But that's fine. But I like to leave the reader thinking. And I often get reviews that say, I'm still thinking about that book and I finished it ages ago. And that's my mission, really, more than anything else. I want to leave the reader to use their own imagination and to come up with their own devices. But a lot of people have said to me, oh, what would happen next? What's the next bit of the journey? So despite all odds, whether it'll even get there, but I'm 10,000 words in at the moment, so we'll see.
This is great news. I would love to read that, what happened next, because this is one of the things. You leave us with the hunger for knowledge of what's coming up. And we always ask all the authors who come to Librissimo to advise us. If you could invite someone to Librissimo, another fellow author, who would it be and why? And just the only thing is, it has to be alive.
Really? That's a bit disappointing. No. Okay, so I have lots of indie friends and some trad published friends and so on, but two people spring to mind.
Okay.
Because they've both had work published with Dilatando, and I know they've got a really good working relationship with Jose as well. And that's Coy Hall. He's an American writer. He's a wonderful person. He's a university lecturer in medieval history. He writes again in a wide range of genres, horror, but also sci-fi, crime, western. He's been published by Dilatando, as I say, and he's got a new book coming out soon, which I've read, which is amazing. And then another one I would recommend, a UK writer, Beverly Lee. She's also been published with Dilatando. She's a lovely, lovely person. And she writes gothic horror and vampire horror. She writes with a partner sometimes, Nicole Aina. I'm not certain I've pronounced her name right. Both wonderful girls. And Bev writes very atmospheric, quiet horror, kind of similar to me, if you know what I mean. Nothing too gory or too, there's no slasher, that kind of thing. So both of those would be good names for you.
Great. I'm writing everybody's suggestions, so maybe one day we will have them over. And the last question for you today is, can you tell us what was the last book that you read that you recommend because it blew your mind?
Okay. I read very widely and I'm very much a mood reader. I'm really taking a huge love into literary fiction at the moment, and I know some people frown upon it, but I love genre fiction as well. I love anthologies, short stories, but at the moment I'm having a real deep dive into literary fiction because I feel that it sort of helps me progress my own work as well. And a book I read recently that was just incredible, like you say, one of those books you say, I want everybody to read this book, was Prophet Song by the Irish author Paul Lynch. It won the 2023 prize. It's a dystopian story set in Ireland. And it really is a book. It is so suitable for what we're going through now, our period of history. It's about how quickly any society can collapse. I mean, modern Ireland is doing really well, but how quickly that can change due to politics and regimes that spring up, and how you can become complacent and think, oh, but it won't happen in my country, but how quickly it can. And it was a very frightening book for that reason, how everything fell apart. Literally overnight, basically. And what it really brought to me was the awareness of the plight of refugees, because there's a lot of talk about this at the moment, and there are a lot of opinions out there, and I'm not even going to state my own opinion, but it made me realize, hang on, you could be next. Think about these people and what they're going through. And I mean, in Ireland, many years ago, they had the potato famine, and a lot of them, had to go and live in other countries just to save their own lives and so on. So we've all been there throughout history, and any of us could be next. But it was an incredible piece of writing. He breaks many rules of writing, as in sort of style and form, but it works. What I love to learn about is like, I read something and I think you've broken all those rules, but you've done it because you know how to do it. You know all the rules, so you're choosing to break them for effect, not to be cool, and that's how it works. So it was an amazing book on many levels for me, and it's a book I felt I could learn from.
Okay, we took note, and I wanted to thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure, and I really, really hope we are going to see more of your work in Spanish. You just said it, that probably is coming up, and therefore I'm not gonna say goodbye, but see you soon, because I hope we can talk to you again about this other project that is coming up in Spanish. So thank you so much for coming to LIBRISIMO.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone if you're going to listen to this as well. I appreciate your time.